So we're going to be talking about routing and presentation. Now, when I mean routing, right? So are you guys familiar with, so in the video game community, there's something called speedrunning. Have you guys ever heard of that?
No.
Hold on.
So who's played video games before? Show of hands. So imagine, what game have you played?
Super Mario.
So imagine Super Mario, right? And imagine somebody trying to beat Super Mario in like 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And they just keep practicing and practicing until they do it, right? So they have techniques that they use to be able to figure out how to go through the levels quickly, right? But why it's important to us is because that technique also helps us to figure out how we could go to success in the quickest way possible, right? And it's similar to what we've already learned. So we're going to go ahead and route our career success. And then also what I want to do today is talk to you guys about the presentation that you guys are going to be doing, okay? And hopefully if you have any questions that come up, we could kind of hash out these ideas, and that way it's a clear, succinct understanding of what you guys are expected to have next week. Sounds good?
Sounds good.
Great.
Awesome. Okay. So routing your career path, right? So on average, you guys are probably in school 16 to 18 years, right? After you get out of school, you're expected to work maybe about 40 years and then retire for about 11 years. 11, 12. Average age that people die is about 72, right?
No, 72. They raised it up.
Oh, so what is it now?
We were talking about this in my other class. He said men die at 78 and women live to about 84.
Lucky.
83 or something like that.
Yeah. Well, men die quicker because of the testosterone. So,
yeah,
and
that's what they said that ages moved up.
yeah, heart issues. Yeah.
Social Security is not that for us.
So
That's because
life.
baby boomers.
So retirement is about, what was that, like 5 years more, right?
Yeah.
So we're at 16. Okay. Does that seem like something that seems like awesome to you guys?
No.
No, I want to retire. I have 50 years.
So you're going to retire and have 50 years of retirement? You're going to get bored, man.
Not about money.
So let's assume, right, that it's a straight line, right? So the easiest route is get a job at $50,000 a year. That's $2 million in a lifetime, right? Retire for 11 years and then die, right? That's the straight path. But what we've learned so far is that there are other options that you can have. So video 1 talks about where we are going, taking inventory. Where do you start out, right? And then having a WTF attitude, which is willingness to fail in order to find different opportunities that are out there, right? Then the next thing that we learned is we could take this to evaluate the opportunities that are out there if we have an entrepreneurial mindset, right? And what this means is we view things differently from a different perspective and try to see the opportunities in the problems or the patterns or things that are different, that stand out, right? And this gives us different options that we could also utilize to not make it so straightforward, just 40 years and die. No, we want to have residual income. We want to have money for traveling, going out. Maybe we don't want to retire for 50 years, but we want to get little blocks of time we could buy and fit that in that huge red line of just working, right? Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah.
With the entrepreneurial mindset, we could do that, right? The third video talks about the lean startup method. So just because you're an entrepreneur doesn't mean that you're not going to be employed, right? Some of the companies that you end up showing your business to are hiring you, right? They're either hiring you for a service, for your expertise, or your product. So as far as using this mindset just to develop a business, that's the wrong way to think about it. You want to develop this mindset so that way you're making money always. Whether you're at a job, at home sleeping, or actually doing what it is that you're getting paid to do, right? So this concept of the lean startup talks about developing milestones and chunking the spaces within what it takes to get from point A to point B, right? And not only that, you're not just chunking it based on goals, but expectations. Does that make sense? Is there any questions about what I went over so far? Okay. And the last video exposed you to financial statements, right? The use of assets, cash flow statements, right? Income statements, right? And these are these were a way to introduce how to hold your company and the people in your company accountable. The other thing we talked about was innovation accounting, which was a form of holding the teammates accountable for some of the validated learning that needed to happen. And this is just another way of saying this is innovation accounting is the way to prove your concept with things that you learn, right? And this is what you're going to use to prove your point in the presentation, the validated learning. If you guys say, this is what we've done, this is what we learned, and this is why what we learned is true, I cannot find anything as far as a chink or any reason why that wouldn't relate to that, then you guys get an A, right? For every chink that I find or everything that I see as a way to prove that that concept is false, based on your argument. I'm not going to pull something out of left field, right? It's only based on what you tell me. That's going to be a chink in the points that you guys get. Make sense? Okay. So the idea is for each aspect that you're testing in your business model, what you're going to want to do is at each point that you develop a concept or idea that you want to test out, you're able to stop, evaluate it, and then make either a pivot or stop the business at key points in the development. I know ideally it would be a straight line where you go from business idea to success, but that's never the case. And in order to do it effectively, right, you need to have points where you pivot. And these points are based on the accounting and the learning that you do. Does that make sense? Yeah. Is there any questions so far about what I talked about? Awesome. Okay. So let's talk about innovation accounting, right? We talk about creating the story. Remember, it's about the customer's perspective. Define it from the way the customer sees it, right? It's very easy to say, we want to evaluate success. So let's look at revenue, profit, and units sold, right? But those metrics doesn't tell you the story about what the customer is going through. And when you're first starting out, there's no revenue, right? There's no units sold, right? You guys don't have a product. So how could you prove that successful? How could you get somebody to give you money for your ideas? The way you do this is create the story from the customer's perspective. At that point, you want to find the underlying truth in that experiment, right? And the way you find that truth is by creating metrics and a test, right? So the metrics like revenue, units sold, cost, those are what's known as lagging variables because they come up after you run the business, right? But what you use to determine success are leading variables. We talked about this. The example I gave was the time that you study is a leading variable to determine whether you're going to be successful in a test, right? And the lagging variable is that grade. So what are your leading variables? What do you have to study in order to pass a test? What do you have to do in order to become successful in that business that you guys are creating right now, right? Is there any questions about that so far? Discover the truth. What is the underlying belief behind some of the things that you guys are stating? If you say, I'm able to make a successful business, and if you give me your money, I'm able to give you 25% profit, what belief is motivating that? Because people aren't just motivated on the facts, they're motivated on their belief. And how could you test that belief? What are you using to make it not just real for you, but real for that person? You see what I'm saying? Is there questions about that? No. Okay. And last but not least, report your findings. Make it in such a way that it's easy for anybody to understand. I gave Anthony the example because he's creating a spreadsheet about the pricing point. If he's able to explain it to his mom, who might not have any understanding of business, he could definitely explain it to an investor. You see what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Any questions about that? Okay. So what they recommend usually is to create a one-page report, right? So if you do an experiment and it's 4 pages or 5 pages long, I remember my father-in-law was in the waste management industry and he would call the reports hamburgers because they were like 30 pages to 40 pages long every week when he had to read reports and talk to the board, right? Condense that to 1 page, okay? Because if you want people to read what you have or read what you have to say, Making it long, people are just going to scan it, or people are just going to like, glaze over, be like, oh my God, another hamburger report, and just put it to the side. 1 page, simple knowledge. And if you keep it in the perspective of the customer, people care, because those are the people who are buying your product. Any questions about that so far? Awesome. So now the buckets, right? I know this is a little bit confusing, but pretty much the way you want to think about it is you have a bucket that can only take about 4 to 5 projects. And the reason I say 4 to 5 projects, so with the business model canvas, there's so many things you could test, right? And often when I'm talking to you guys, I see that it's a little bit overwhelming. It's like, oh my God, I have to test all these things by next week. No, for the class, just focus on 1 for now. But ideally, by the end of the class, when your final presentation is up, you would have tested 4 different values, right? If you do any more than 4, it might be a bit overwhelming. I know even with just the 1, it seems like it's a lot, right?
A little bit.
A little bit? You think you could do more? Depending on what?
Like this is a class, so I need to do 1, so I can definitely do 1. If I needed to do 2, I'd probably do 2.
So if, let's say for example, you do 2, right? I find a chink in 1, but the other one is solid. What grade do you think you got?
Probably like a C or a B. A? Oh, okay, cool.
Because if there's at least one thing that you prove, and I can't find a chink in it, hey man, I got to give you that A, because everything else is solid. Maybe there's one mistake, fine. Everybody makes mistakes. But I'm not going to penalize you because you're overachieving. If I expect 1 and you do 5, and then one of them that's right, that increases your chances of getting that A. If you just do 1, if you just test one idea, and then that ends up being the flop,
then that's how you got the show.
right. And then if you think about it as far as investors are concerned, if they see that you're trying your hardest to get this idea off the ground, you don't want to just try to prove 1 idea. You want to try to prove 5. And even if they find a chink in 1, they could work on that. At least you have 4 values that actually are associated to a business model that might actually work. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Is there any questions about that?
No.
Okay, cool. So the other thing that I said, which might be confusing, is don't start another project until the story is complete. So stories have a beginning, a middle, an end, and the main character for us is the customer, right? So what is the beginning? The value, the belief. What is the middle? The test, the things that you guys are experimenting with, right? And what is the end? When do you know that you're done experimenting and finding something out? I'm asking, when do you guys know?
When you have your results. When the customers start buying.
When you have your results and customers start buying?
Yeah.
What does that tell you?
That you did your job.
What's the word that I'm always repeating that begins with a V? What kind of learning?
Value.
Validated learning.
Oh, validation. I was trying to think of
Right.
something.
That's when you stop. When you've learned something and you're able to move past that and do something different or do something better, then you stop. Because if you don't learn anything, you're just going to keep making the same mistake, right? Okay. Any questions about this so far? Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Awesome. So as you start finishing the projects, right, your bucket gets empty and you could add more projects to it. That seems pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah.
The way you want to see it, it's a cycle. It's a cycle of entrepreneurship, right? It's a matter of evaluating your opportunities, testing them out, discovering new ideas, evaluating if that's something whether you want to pursue or pivot from, and then making new assumptions and then starting the process over again, okay? And the way you want to present it is as a timeline, right? You develop your value proposition, the name of your business, who you are, right? What are you selling, right? And then you come up with the hypothesis and the business model, right? So you should have a slide for each of your key components. Not key components. For each of the different topics that are in your business model canvas, okay? Then the test that you've done, right? So if you're testing one value or one component of that business model canvas, you would say it there, right? And then you would go to the result. And it should be clear cut so that way everybody understands. Now, if you do 2 tests, you do the test and the result. Then you do the second test and the result. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Is there any questions about that? Okay. What then was going to happen when we get into the final presentation, we're already going to have layers of different values and different tests, right? That we will have accumulated over the weeks of doing all this testing, right? And then the final presentation will be a lot simpler, right? It'll be the value proposition, the proven value, the proven growth, your business model as a proven process, and the leading metrics that determine success, and the money, the cost, the revenue, the profit. Do you want to invest? You always end with that. Do you want to invest? Do you want to give me your money? Do you want to be a part of this team? Make sense? Is there any questions about that so far? Okay. I know I breezed through this, so let me give you some killer tips to kill the presentation, right? So I had a friend who used to work for Hot 97, and he would go on different concerts. And one of the concerts he was in was with KRS-One. And, he actually got to talk to him and ask him, like, how do you kill it on all these performances? And what he said is you have to own your space. So usually when you present, this is going to be your space. Own it, right? So, don't have